In this training module, you're going to look at making the train move, and then bringing it to a stop again. While many trains have different controls and are operated in different ways, there are basically always 3 controls that are common and are required to move the train. The reverser sets the direction between forwards and backwards. The brakes are used to slow or stop the train. The throttle controls how fast the train accelerates. We want to move the train forwards, so move the reverser in that direction. Keep the brake control in release until you can see the brake pipe control needles are reading 5 bar, pointing upwards. This will release the brakes fully. Watch the brake cylinder, or BC gauge, to see it gradually reduce to 0, which tells you that the brakes are now fully released and you can move the train. Apply some throttle to get the train moving. As you apply power, notice the amp bar rising. This is the amount of power being fed into the traction motors. Now that you've reached your target speed, you can move the throttle control back to 0. The train will then coast on level ground, and the train will only slow down very gradually. While the specifics of operating brakes vary from train to train, the basic process of stopping is fundamentally the same. Bring this train to a complete stop by holding the brake control in the apply state until you see the brake pipe control needle in the center of your cab desk showing about 4 bar. The amount of braking you'll need to apply also varies depending on whether you're going uphill or downhill, and how heavy your train is. Stopping a train is one of the biggest challenges of controlling them, particularly stopping them in the right place. That concludes this module. Restart the module to learn the steps again, or move on to the next module.
All right, in this training module, you'll be learning about the different brake types found in a typical U.S. freight locomotive. Take a seat in the engineer's position. Now you'll go through the steps needed to take over this locomotive. This locomotive has 3 types of brakes: independent, automatic, and dynamic. And the operation of them can be counterintuitive until you get the hang of how they work. The independent brake applies brakes on just the locomotives and should be used when running a light loco or performing hill starts. They respond very quickly, but won't be of great use when you've got a long, heavy train behind you. The automatic brake applies brakes on the entire formation and should be used when bringing a consist to a stop, assisting the dynamic brakes on steep descents, or otherwise making more substantial speed decreases. These brakes are slow to respond, and you can't partially release them. So if you want a bit less braking, you have to release them entirely, wait for the system to repressurize, and then you can reapply. The dynamic brake uses the locomotive's traction motors to slow the train down. These can be very effective at controlling your speed on descents, and are mostly effective between around 10 and 30 miles per hour. Either side of that, you're going to need one of the other brake systems. There are several gauges used to describe what is happening in the brake system of this locomotive, and they're common to a wide range of locomotives. The brake cylinder, or BC gauge, tells you the amount of pressure going directly onto the wheels. Now, this is ultimately how much braking effort is stopping your train. If it's 0, the train is not applying any brakes. The independent brake lever directly controls this, but be aware that this is only reporting the state of the brake cylinder on your own locomotive, and not the rest of the train. Apply the independent brake now to full, and notice that the BC gauge rapidly changes. The brake pipe, or BP gauge, tells you the amount of pressure on the brake pipe that extends the length of the entire train. On U.S. freight, this is pressurized to 90 psi as normal. The brake pipe serves 2 functions. One is to provide air to all the freight cars down the length of the train so they can charge their own reservoirs. The other is that its pressure controls what the other vehicles do with their brakes. At 90 psi, the brakes on all vehicles will be released. As the brake pressure in the brake pipe drops below 90 psi, the other vehicles will apply brakes. Depending on the length of your train, changing the pressure on the brake pipe can be quite time-consuming, whether charging it up to release the brakes or reducing the pressure to apply them. And this is the reason that automatic brakes are tricky to use. The brake pipe works in conjunction with another system called the equalizing reservoir. Because charging the brake pipe is time-consuming, and you don't want to be watching that to find the right pressure, the equalizing reservoir is a much faster responding gauge and is what you primarily use to control the brake pipe. The automatic brake handle controls the equalizing reservoir. Release the automatic brake, and you will see the equalizing reservoir rapidly rise back to 90 psi. At this point, the final reservoir will come into action. The main... Now there are some key behaviors of this system to remember. The longer the formation, the slower the brake pipe will be to respond. You cannot partially release automatic brakes. If you are braking too much, you may need to fully release the brakes, allow the brake pipe to get back to 90 psi again, and then you can reapply them. This should be carefully considered, however, as you will have no air brakes during this time. Bring the train to a stop in the indicated position using the automatic brake. Well, that concludes this training module. It's covered a lot of theory, but understanding the way these brakes work will help you understand why your train reacts the way it does. These freight trains are nothing like modern passenger trains with fast-acting and fully controllable brakes, but equally, they must manage massive, long, and heavy trains on steep gradients, an entirely different kind of challenge. Run this module again in the training center and repeat it any time you need a refresher. Welcome to driver training at the training center. Today you'll be learning how to drive this EMD SD40-2 locomotive in BNSF Railway livery. The SD40-2 started production in 1972, with the last unit being built in 1986. Rated at 3,000 horsepower and weighing at least 170 tons, the SD40-2 is rated with a continuous tractive effort of 831,000 pounds. Over 4,000 SD40-2 locomotives were produced by EMD in various configurations, and many are still in use today, 50 years after they were first introduced. When you're ready to begin, climb aboard. Sit in the engineer's seat. Now you'll go through the steps needed to take over this locomotive. Firstly, you will need to set the generator field switch. This needs to be enabled for the throttle to control the power of the train. This locomotive requires the reverser handle to be inserted before operation. The reverser determines the direction of travel. Switch the front headlights on. Regardless of the time of day or weather, all locomotives must have their headlights on. When getting moving, it's worth remembering the following sequence. Independent on, auto off. Throttle on, independent off. Let's go through that slowly and understand why. First, fully apply the independent brake. Now, this will ensure that regardless of anything else, your train won't move. Next, fully release the automatic brake. This will release the brakes on the rest of the train, but you won't go anywhere because those independent brakes are holding you. Now, apply a small amount of throttle and verify that power is generated. Finally, release the independent brake and you'll start moving. This is a great practice to get used to because it'll help you with two key areas. The first is that you verify that the train will take power before you release the brakes. You don't want to find yourself without power and having to hurriedly put the brakes back on. The second is that having power applied as you release the independent brakes ensures that you won't roll backwards. On steeper hill starts, you may even need to start with more power. And this is something you can practice and get used to as you find yourself out on the railroad. If you have any locomotives on the rear of the train behind freight cars, you can press the banking comms button to enable radio communications with those remote units. This will ensure that they operate their throttle and brakes in unison with your own locomotive, giving you much-needed extra control on your journey. Press it now, just to get practice, even though there aren't any connected. Coasting is a method used to efficiently maintain speed and reduce motor stress and maintenance requirements. Come to a stop in the indicated position using the independent brake. Independent brakes apply only to the locomotives in the formation and are much faster to apply and release than the automatic brake, which operates on the entire train. Change direction with a reverser. Then change the junction indicated, either by walking over to it or using the map. Before proceeding, check the two couplers are in the right position to allow for automatic coupling. Look at the rear coupler on your train and ensure it's open. Operate the cut bar if it is closed to release it. Next, walk over to the freight cars you're going to couple to and check their coupler knuckle is open too. Operate the cut bar here to open the knuckle. Before coupling cars, always check the knuckles are open, or you'll just bounce right off. Okay. The junction is correctly aligned and the cars are ready to couple. Couple up to the cars by gently driving into them at a slow speed. Most freight uses automatic knuckle couplers, so they will automatically couple once they connect. If your speed is too high, you risk derailing when coupling. Apply some brakes to slow your approach. Hey, nice work. Now change direction with the reverser and move the train forward into the indicated siding. Remember to apply a little power before releasing brakes. While it's not strictly necessary in the training center, this is the time to start forming great habits. Since you have freight cars coupled, you should slow down using the automatic brake and get the extra braking effort from those freight cars. The automatic brake applies brakes throughout the entire train.